I stood at the gates of Mesa Valley Training Facility, heart pounding against my freshly pressed uniform. The silver badge I'd polished for hours caught the morning sunlight, reflecting my distorted face back at me. My hair was pulled back in a tight bun, not a single strand out of place, exactly as protocol required. Today was graduation day, the culmination of everything I had sacrificed since I was 15 years old. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the parade grounds where folding chairs had been arranged in perfect rows. Families were already filtering in, carrying bouquets and balloons, their faces bright with pride. My mother would be arriving soon in her borrowed wheelchair, escorted by our neighbor, Mrs. Ramirez. Mom had been working double shifts for years to help me get through this academy, even as her health deteriorated. Today was as much her victory as it was mine. Name? The officer at the check-in table didn't look up from her computer. Cadet Jasmine Taylor, I replied, standing taller, shoulders back. The clicking of keys filled the pause that followed. Then more clicking. The officer's brow furrowed as she glanced up at me, then back at her screen. I'm sorry, she said with an awkward shift in her posture. Your name isn't on the graduation list. I froze, certain I'd misheard. That's impossible. I completed all requirements. I ranked 5th in the class. She typed my name again, slower this time. Taylor Jasmine. Taylor, more clicking. A shake of her head. I'm sorry, but you're not listed here. The ground seemed to sway beneath my feet. Behind me, I could hear other cadets checking in, receiving their seating assignments, moving forward while I remained stuck in this impossible moment. There must be a mistake, I insisted. My voice barely audible above the growing crowd. I passed all my exams. I completed every training module. Before the officer could respond, a familiar figure approached. Commander Douglas Price, the Academy's training director, a man who had spent 6 months looking through me as if I were made of glass. Today, he didn't look through me. He looked at me with thinly veiled irritation. Is there a problem here, Officer Martinez? He asked, though his eyes never left my face. Sir, Cadet Taylor isn't on the graduation roster. Commander Price made a show of glancing at the computer screen, though I doubted he could see it from where he stood. That's correct. Cadet Taylor is not graduating today. Step aside, please. You're holding up the line. The dismissive tone in his voice sliced through me like a blade. Sir, there must be some mistake. I completed all requirements. Step aside, cadet. His voice hardened. That's an order. A sharp laugh cut through the tension. Brooke Collins, the commander's obvious favorite, stood just behind me in line, her uniform impeccable, her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect bun. Unlike me, she came from a long line of law enforcement officials. Her father was a captain in the Phoenix PD, her grandfather a former state trooper. Maybe you should have ironed your uniform better, Jasmine, she smirked, loud enough for others to hear. Or maybe try a new dream next time. Some people just aren't academy material. Heat rushed to my face as I felt the stares of everyone around me. The whispers had already started. My stomach twisted into knots. Sir, please, I tried one last time, my voice barely steady. My mother is on her way. She's ill. This means everything to her. For a brief moment, something flickered across Commander Price's face. Doubt, perhaps, or the faintest trace of humanity. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. That's unfortunate, he said flatly. But rules are rules. You're not on the list. Now step aside. I swallowed hard, fighting back tears that threatened to spill. 6 months of grueling training, years of preparation before that. Night shifts at the diner to help support Mom while she battled her illness. All of it seemed to evaporate in this moment of public humiliation. With nothing left to say, I turned and began walking toward the side gate, away from the ceremony, away from the dream I'd clutched so tightly. Hey, Taylor, Brooke called after me. Don't forget to turn in your uniform. Some of us actually earned the right to wear it. Laughter followed me, sharp and cruel. I kept walking, one foot in front of the other, my vision blurring. Then just as I reached the gate, I heard a radio crackle behind me. Commander Price, a voice called out urgently. Sir, you're needed at command. I paused, not sure why. What is it? I'm busy here, Price responded, irritation evident in his voice. Sir, General Reed is on the line. He's asking for Cadet Jasmine Taylor. Immediately. The name sent a ripple through the crowd. General Jonathan Reed was a national figure in law enforcement, a decorated officer whose reputation for integrity was legendary. What could he possibly want with me? I turned slowly to find Commander Price staring at me, his face suddenly drained of color. Brooke's mocking grin had vanished, replaced by confusion and something else. Fear, perhaps. Cadet Taylor, Commander Price said, his tone completely transformed. Please come with me. As I walked back across the parade grounds, I could feel every eye on me. The whispers had changed tenor, become questions rather than mockery. Brooke stood frozen, watching me pass. In that moment, with the sun beating down on my carefully pressed uniform and my heart thundering in my chest, I had no idea that everything was about to change. That the humiliation I'd just endured was about to be washed away by a tide of truth I couldn't yet imagine. All I knew was that someone important had asked for me by name. And for the first time since I'd arrived at Mesa Valley Training Facility, I felt seen. The command center was eerily quiet as Commander Price led me through the door. The usual buzz of activity had been suspended, officers standing at attention along the walls. At the center of the room, a secure video conference had been set up on the main screen. "Wait here," Commander Price instructed, his voice tense. He straightened his uniform and stepped forward, facing the blank screen. "General Reed, sir. This is Commander Douglas Price of Mesa Valley Training Facility." The screen flickered to life, revealing a distinguished man in his early 60s. General Jonathan Reed's reputation preceded him, a decorated officer who had risen through the ranks through merit rather than connections, known for his commitment to reforming law enforcement training nationwide. "Commander Price," the general acknowledged with a curt nod. "I understand there may be some confusion regarding today's graduation ceremony." Price shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, we're running the ceremony according to protocol. All qualified cadets are accounted for." "All qualified cadets?" The general's voice was measured but carried an undercurrent of steel. "That's interesting because I'm looking at Cadet Jasmine Taylor's file right now. Top 5 in academic testing. Exemplary performance in tactical training. Perfect attendance? Multiple commendations from civilian observers during field exercises." He paused. "Yet somehow she's not on your graduation list." Commander Price's posture stiffened. "There were other considerations, sir. Bring her forward," General Reed ordered. Commander Price motioned for me to step into the frame. I moved forward, standing at attention, trying to control my racing heartbeat. "Cadet Taylor," General Reed said, his expression softening slightly. "At ease." I relaxed my posture marginally, unsure what was happening. "Cadet, are you aware of why I'm calling today?" he asked. "No, sir," I replied honestly. 3 months ago, during your community policing rotation, you responded to an incident at Westfield Mall involving a young boy named Marcus Johnson. Do you recall this? The memory came back immediately. "Yes, sir." 11-year-old male, accused of shoplifting by store security. The situation was escalating when we arrived. "Tell me how you handled it," he said, though the way he watched me suggested he already knew. The security guard was being aggressive. The boy was frightened, crying. His mother was distraught, claiming racial profiling. I paused, remembering the tension in that moment. I separated the parties, spoke to the boy directly. He admitted taking a pair of headphones because his had broken, and he needed them for school. I facilitated a resolution. The mother agreed to pay for the headphones. The store agreed not to press charges. I also connected the family with community resources for after-school support. General Reed nodded. "What Commander Price may not have told you is that Marcus Johnson is my grandson." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. I glanced at Commander Price, whose face had gone ashen. My daughter, Marcus's mother, wrote to me about a young female officer who treated her son with dignity when others were ready to criminalize him for a childish mistake. The general continued. She said this officer saw her son as a person first, not just another case. I had my staff track down the incident report. "Your report, Cadet Taylor." I stood speechless as the general continued. "Your report was exceptional, thorough, compassionate, and showing remarkable insight into community needs. I began following your progress at the academy. What I found was a pattern of excellence paired with a pattern of being overlooked." He turned his attention to Commander Price. "I called the academy 3 weeks ago to inquire about Cadet Taylor. I was told she was average at best and not leadership material. Imagine my surprise when I requested her complete file and found something very different." Commander Price's face flushed. "Sir, I can explain." "I'm sure you can," General Reed cut him off. "And you will to the board of inquiry I'm convening next week?" He turned back to me. Cadet Taylor, I'd like to inform you that as of today, you have been selected to join our National Community Engagement Task Force, reporting directly to my office in Washington. The room spun around me. I struggled to maintain my composure. Furthermore, the general continued, I am ordering Commander Price to proceed with your graduation today, with full honors. I will be watching the live stream to ensure this happens. He looked past me, addressing someone behind us. Is Mrs. Taylor present yet? I turned to see my mother being wheeled into the command center by Mrs. Ramirez, her face drawn with concern. Mom, I breathed, moving to her side. What's happening, Jasmine? She asked, her voice weak but her eyes alert. General Reed spoke up. Mrs. Taylor, I'm General Jonathan Reed. I wanted to personally inform you that your daughter is not only graduating today, but has been selected for a prestigious national position. You should be extraordinarily proud. My mother's tired face transformed, years of worry melting away as tears filled her eyes. She reached for my hand and squeezed it with surprising strength. I've always been proud, she said, looking up at me with a smile that made all the struggle worth it. General Reed nodded. Commander Price will ensure you have VIP seating for today's ceremony. And Cadet Taylor will be recognized appropriately. His tone made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. As the call ended, Commander Price stood frozen for a moment before turning to me, his expression unreadable. It seems congratulations are in order, Cadet Taylor, he said stiffly. Please proceed to the graduation staging area. Officer Martinez will update the roster immediately. As he strode from the room, the other officers exchanged glances. Something fundamental had shifted in the power dynamics of Mesa Valley Training Facility. I knelt beside my mother's wheelchair. I don't understand what just happened, I whispered. She touched my cheek gently. Justice happened, sweetheart. Sometimes it takes its time, but it always arrives. As we moved toward the door, an officer stopped us. Cadet Taylor, you might want to know. Word's already spreading. Brooke Collins is being questioned about allegations that she falsified reports about your performance. The vindication I felt was immediately tempered by something else. Not pity for Brooke, but a strange sense of peace. I had never tried to sabotage her or anyone else. I had simply done my best, day after day, when no one seemed to notice or care, and somehow, when it mattered most, that had been enough. The graduation ceremony began under a sky so blue it hurt to look at it. Rows of white chairs filled with families, officials, and press who'd caught wind that something unusual was happening at Mesa Valley. I stood with the other graduates behind the stage, my place in line hastily added, my name freshly printed on a diploma that hadn't existed an hour ago. Brooke stood as far from me as possible, her usual confidence shattered. Word had spread quickly about General Reed's intervention, though the details remained murky to most. Whispers followed me as I moved through the ranks of cadets. Some offered awkward congratulations, others averted their eyes, suddenly remembering times they'd laughed at Brooke's jokes at my expense. Cadets, attention. The command rang out and we snapped into formation. Commander Price took the stage, his face a careful mask of authority. If you hadn't seen him pale before General Reed, you'd never know his command had been compromised. He began with the usual speech about duty and honor, words that rang hollow now that I knew how selectively they were applied. From my position, I could see my mother in the front row, a place hastily cleared for her wheelchair. Mrs. Ramirez sat beside her, occasionally dabbing at Mom's tears with a tissue. Behind them, I noticed a cluster of people I didn't recognize, men and women in suits, observing the proceedings with unusual intensity. Representatives from General Reed's office, I assumed. Today we celebrate excellence, Commander Price continued. These cadets have proven themselves worthy of the badge they will wear. I fought to keep my expression neutral. Just an hour ago, I'd been deemed unworthy of even standing on this stage. The ceremony proceeded, names called alphabetically. The closer we got to T, the more my heart raced. Would they really call my name? Despite General Reed's orders, part of me still expected one final humiliation. Cadet Jasmine Taylor. The announcement came clear and strong. I stepped forward, crossing the stage with measured steps. Commander Price held out my diploma, forced to look me in the eye as I accepted it. His smile never reached his eyes. Congratulations, Cadet Taylor, he said, voice pitched for the audience. Then he added, barely audible, this doesn't change anything. You're still not Academy material. I took my diploma, meeting his gaze steadily. Thank you, sir. General Reed disagrees. His jaw tightened, but he could say nothing more as I moved to receive my badge from the academy director. I felt the weight of it in my palm, the symbol I'd dreamed of since childhood, almost stolen from me through pettiness and prejudice. As I turned to exit the stage, something unexpected happened. Applause erupted, not the polite clapping that had followed other graduates, but thunderous, sustained approval. I glanced out at the crowd, confused. My mother was beaming through her tears, but she wasn't alone. The entire front section had risen to their feet. Among them, I recognized faces from my community policing rotation: the librarian whose harassment complaint I'd handled with discretion, the elderly man whose stolen medication I'd tracked down, the teenage girl I'd connected with counseling instead of juvenile detention. They had come. For me, I descended the steps, diploma and badge clutched to my chest, overwhelmed by the moment. As I returned to my place in formation, I passed Brooke. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her posture defeated. "Did you plan this?" she hissed. "Did you call General Reed to ruin me?" I paused. "I didn't even know who he was, Brooke. I just did my job." The truth was simpler and more powerful than any revenge I could have orchestrated. I had treated people with dignity, all people regardless of their status or circumstance. And when it mattered, they remembered. After the ceremony, the reception area buzzed with activity. I stood with my mother, accepting congratulations from people who had ignored me for months. The hypocrisy was not lost on me, but I smiled and thanked them anyway. Understanding that power shifts quickly and people follow its current. Cadet Taylor. A woman in a crisp suit approached, hand extended. "I'm Colonel Patricia Hayes from General Reed's office. He sends his regrets that he couldn't be here in person." "It's an honor to meet you, ma'am," I replied, shaking her hand. "The honor is ours. We've been following your work. That report on community policing alternatives was impressive." I blinked in surprise. "That was just a class assignment. One that showed remarkable insight." She handed me a card. "We'd like you to report to Washington next Monday. The General believes your perspective is exactly what our national initiative needs." As we spoke, I noticed a commotion near the administration building. Commander Price was escorting Brooke away from the crowd, both looking grim. Something was happening, but I had no desire to know what. Their stories would continue without me. Colonel Hayes followed my gaze. "Some situations correct themselves once the light shines on them," she said cryptically. "Focus on your future, Cadet Taylor. It's considerably brighter than theirs." Later that evening, Mom and I sat in our small apartment, my uniform jacket draped over a chair, the badge and diploma on our worn coffee table. Mrs. Ramirez had brought over a homemade cake, and we'd celebrated quietly, the enormity of the day settling around us like a comfortable blanket. "I still can't believe it," I said, sinking into the couch beside Mom. "Washington, D.C., a national task force." She took my hand, her fingers thin but warm. "I can believe it. You've always had something special, Jasmine. Not just intelligence, but heart. You see people, really see them." "I learned that from you," I said softly. She smiled, fatigue etched in the lines around her eyes. Years of night shifts and worry had taken their toll, but tonight she looked peaceful. "What Commander Price never understood," she said, "is that empathy isn't weakness. It's the hardest kind of strength." My phone chimed with a news alert. I opened it to find a local headline. "Mesa Valley Academy under investigation. Commander suspended pending review." I showed it to Mom, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Not satisfaction exactly, but confirmation that the world occasionally rights itself. "Will you testify against him?" she asked. I considered the question. "If they ask me, I'll tell the truth. But I won't seek revenge. That's my girl." She squeezed my hand. "Some people destroy themselves without any help." As night fell over Phoenix, I packed my few belongings for the journey ahead. My uniform hung pressed and perfect in my closet, no longer a symbol of rejection, but of perseverance. In Washington, no one would know my story. I would begin fresh, judged only by what I contributed, not by where I came from or who my family knew. My phone rang, an unknown number. "Hello?" "Cadet Taylor." General Reed's voice was unmistakable. "I hope I'm not calling too late." "No, sir." "Not at all. I wanted to personally congratulate you, and to make sure you understand why I selected you for this position." I sat on the edge of my bed. "I'm still not entirely sure, sir." In law enforcement, we have plenty of people who know how to enforce. What we lack are people who know how to protect, especially the vulnerable. Your handling of my grandson's case showed me you understand the difference. I thought of Marcus, the frightened boy at the mall. He was just a kid who made a mistake. Exactly. And you saw him as a child first, a potential offender second. That perspective is rare and valuable. He paused. The task force you're joining is developing new training protocols for departments nationwide. Your experiences, both good and bad, will inform that work. After we hung up, I stood at my bedroom window looking out at the desert night. Tomorrow I would begin making arrangements for Mom's care while I was in Washington. There would be challenges ahead, certainly. But tonight, for the first time in years, I felt the perfect alignment of purpose and opportunity. The path that had seemed blocked had suddenly opened wide before me. Not because I had played the game better than Brooke or outmaneuvered Commander Price, but because I had refused to let their game change who I was. Washington, D.C. greeted me with rain, a steady, gentle shower that made the monuments glisten like mirages in the distance. My taxi splashed through puddles as we crossed the Potomac, the driver pointing out landmarks I'd only seen in photographs. First time in the Capitol? He asked, catching my wide-eyed gaze in the rearview mirror. That obvious, huh? I laughed, pressing my palm against the window as we passed the Lincoln Memorial. Nothing wrong with that, he grinned. Still gets me sometimes, and I've been driving here 20 years. The National Law Enforcement Training Center occupied a sprawling campus in Virginia, just outside the district. Modern buildings of glass and steel rose from carefully landscaped grounds, American flags snapping in the breeze. My heart hammered as the taxi approached the security checkpoint. A week ago, I'd been deemed unworthy of graduating from a local academy. Now I stood at the entrance to one of the most prestigious law enforcement facilities in the country. Security badge in hand, wondering if someone would realize a mistake had been made. But there was no mistake. The guard checked my credentials, made a call, and within minutes I was being escorted to General Reed's office. The hallways were lined with photographs of graduating classes, distinguished officers, presidential visits. History lived in these corridors, and somehow I was now part of it. Cadet Taylor, General Reed, rose from behind his desk as I entered. In person, he was taller than he'd appeared on the video call, his presence filling the spacious office. Welcome to Washington. Thank you, sir. I shook his outstretched hand, hoping mine wasn't visibly trembling. Please sit. He gestured to a chair across from his desk. How was your flight? Good, sir. Thank you for arranging everything, he smiled slightly. Least I could do after the graduation situation. He studied me for a moment. How's your mother doing? The question caught me off guard. She's stable, sir. The home health aide you helped arrange is making a big difference. General Reed nodded. Excellent. Now let's discuss why you're here. He pressed a button on his desk, and a wall panel slid back to reveal a large screen. Images appeared. Police academies across the country, training exercises, community interactions both positive and negative. Law enforcement in America is at a crossroads, he said, his tone grave. Public trust has eroded. Old methods aren't working. What we need is a fundamental shift in how we train officers, not just in tactics, but in human connection. He turned to me. Your experience at Mesa Valley is unfortunately common. Too many academies still operate on outdated models that prioritize aggression over communication, force over de-escalation. They produce officers who see themselves as warriors, rather than guardians. The images shifted to show a diverse group of people working in what looked like a classroom setting. This is the Community Engagement Task Force, General Reed explained. 20 specialists from various backgrounds, former officers, social workers, mental health professionals, community advocates. For the past year, they've been developing a new training curriculum. What they've lacked is someone who's just been through the current system, someone who can speak to its shortcomings from direct experience. I stared at the screen, understanding dawning. That's where I come in. Exactly. He sat on the edge of his desk. I need someone who experienced the broken system firsthand but didn't break with it. Someone who maintained their integrity despite the pressure to conform or give up. His eyes met mine. Someone like you. The responsibility of what he was asking settled on my shoulders. Sir, I'm honored, but I'm also brand new. There are surely more experienced officers. Experience isn't what we need, he interrupted gently. Fresh perspective is. The task force has plenty of veterans. What it needs is your voice, uncompromised, uncynical, and informed by what you just endured. Before I could respond, there was a knock at the door. Colonel Hayes entered, followed by a diverse group of men and women, the task force I'd seen on screen. Team, General Reed announced, meet our newest member, Jasmine Taylor. The next few hours passed in a blur of introductions and explanations. The task force welcomed me warmly, each member sharing their background and role. Dr. Elena Ramirez, a psychologist specializing in trauma-informed policing. Former Chief Michael Okonkwo, who had revolutionized community relations in Detroit. Layla Washington, whose brother's death at the hands of police had led her to advocacy work. Their stories were powerful, their commitment palpable. By late afternoon, my head was swimming with information. Colonel Hayes must have noticed because she suggested we pause for the day. Jasmine needs time to settle in, she said. Her apartment is ready, and I'm sure she'd like to unpack before dinner. My apartment, as it turned out, was a furnished one-bedroom in a secure building near the training center. Simple but comfortable, with a view of a small park. A welcome basket waited on the kitchen counter. Fresh fruit, local coffee, a guide to the area. The thoughtfulness of it brought a lump to my throat. I unpacked quickly, hanging my uniform in the closet before changing into civilian clothes. As I did, my phone rang. Mom, checking in from Phoenix. The place is beautiful, I told her, describing the view. And everyone's been so kind. I knew they would be, she said, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. The new treatments were helping. They recognize what I've always seen in you. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed, overwhelmed by how quickly life had changed. 3 weeks ago, I'd been scrubbing mess hall floors as punishment for a regulation Brooke had accused me of breaking. Now I was part of a national initiative that could change policing. Across the country, a text message arrived from Colonel Hayes. Team dinner at 7 car. We'll pick you up at 6:45. Business casual. I stood, moving to the window to watch the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Washington spread before me, a city of power and possibility I'd never imagined would be mine to navigate. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain. I would not waste this opportunity. Commander Price had tried to erase me from history. General Reed had given me a chance to help write it instead. Tonight, I would begin. The team dinner took place at a small Italian restaurant, tucked away on a side street in Georgetown. String lights hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow over rustic wooden tables. Our group occupied a private room in the back, where conversation flowed as freely as the wine. I sat between Dr. Ramirez and Layla Washington, listening more than speaking as the team discussed ongoing projects. Though they tried to include me, there was an obvious shorthand among them, inside jokes, references to past work, shared experiences I couldn't possibly understand yet. So, Jasmine, Michael Okonkwo said during a lull in conversation, tell us about Mesa Valley. We've heard General Reed's version, but I'd like to hear yours. The table quieted. All eyes turned to me. It's hard to explain, I began, unsure how much to reveal. On paper, it's a respected academy with a strong tactical program. But off paper? Dr. Ramirez prompted gently. I took a sip of water, organizing my thoughts. It's a place where your background matters more than your performance. Where connections outweigh competence. Where certain people are destined to succeed and others to fail, regardless of what they do. And you were in the second category, Layla stated. It wasn't a question. Yes. The admission felt both painful and freeing. No matter how well I performed, I was never going to be academy material. At least, not according to Commander Price. Colonel Hayes leaned forward. We've reviewed your file, Jasmine. Your scores were exceptional. What exactly was Price's issue with you? I shrugged, uncomfortable with the directness of the question. I didn't fit the mold. My mother's a nurse, not a cop. We live in the east side of Phoenix, not the gated communities where most of the favored cadets come from. And maybe, I hesitated. Go on, General Reed encouraged from the head of the table. Maybe I asked too many questions. About procedures that seemed unnecessarily aggressive. About why we spent 3 weeks on tactical entry but only 2 days on de-escalation techniques. I glanced around the table. That didn't make me popular. Understanding nods circled the room. These people got it. They weren't just listening to my story. They were recognizing patterns they'd seen before. That's exactly why you're here, General Reed said, his voice carrying that natural authority that made everyone listen. Mesa Valley isn't unique. There are academies like it across the country, producing officers who view force as the primary tool and the communities they serve as potential threats, rather than people they're sworn to protect. He raised his glass. To changing that narrative, one academy at a time. As glasses clinked, I felt something shift inside me. The humiliation of Mesa Valley began to transform into something purposeful. My experience wasn't just a personal injustice, it was data. Evidence of a systemic problem I was now in a position to help address. The evening progressed, conversation turning to lighter topics. I learned that Dr. Ramirez had 5 grandchildren, that Michael coached youth basketball on weekends, that Layla was an accomplished painter. They were full, complex people whose commitment to reform was just one facet of rich lives. By the time we left the restaurant, I felt less like an outsider and more like a tentative member of something important. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening under streetlights. As we waited for our respective cars, General Reed pulled me aside. "Tomorrow will be challenging," he said without preamble. "We're receiving visitors from Mesa Valley, Commander Price and 2 of his staff." My stomach dropped. "Sir? The investigation into graduation irregularities has expanded. We need first-hand testimony from key personnel." His expression was unreadable. "I want you to sit in on the meeting. Is that appropriate?" I managed, imagining Price's face when he saw me. "Completely. You're part of this task force now, and this concerns training protocols you're helping to reform." He studied me. "Unless you're uncomfortable with the confrontation." Pride straightened my spine. "No, sir, I'll be there." He nodded approvingly. "Over 900 hours, main conference room. Professional attire. That night, sleep eluded me. I paced my new apartment, rehearsing what I might say if directly questioned tomorrow. I didn't want revenge against Price, but I wouldn't lie to protect him either. The truth was complicated enough. Morning arrived with unforgiving brightness. I dressed carefully in the navy pantsuit I'd purchased for job interviews, pulling my hair back in a neat twist. Professional, composed, ready. The main conference room at the training center was imposing. A long mahogany table surrounded by high-backed leather chairs. The seal of the Department of Justice mounted on the wall. I arrived 15 minutes early, settling into a chair near the middle of the table. Colonel Hayes nodded approvingly at my punctuality. At precisely 9 the door opened. General Reed entered, followed by 2 officials I didn't recognize. And then Commander Douglas Price, flanked by his executive officer and, my breath caught, Brooke Collins. Price's eyes widened when he saw me, a flash of anger quickly suppressed. Brooke looked terrible, pale, drawn, her usual confidence nowhere in evidence. She wouldn't meet my gaze. "Commander Price, thank you for coming," General Reed began formally. "I believe you know Cadet Taylor, now Officer Taylor of our National Community Engagement Task Force." Price gave a tight nod in my direction. "Officer Taylor," he acknowledged stiffly. "Please be seated," General Reed continued. "We have much to discuss." What followed was the most excruciating 3 hours of my life. The officials, who identified themselves as investigators from the Office of Professional Responsibility, methodically presented evidence of systemic discrimination at Mesa Valley. Altered test scores, manipulated evaluations, preferential assignments, a pattern that extended far beyond my case. "Commander Price," one investigator said, "can you explain why Officer Jasmine Taylor's final evaluation was changed from exceeds expectations to below standards between May 15th and graduation day?" Price shifted uncomfortably. "I have no knowledge of specific—" "We have the digital audit trail, Commander," the investigator interrupted, sliding a document across the table. "Your login credentials were used to make the change at 11:42 p.m. on June 10th. As evidence mounted, Brooke grew increasingly agitated. Finally, during a brief recess, she approached me in the hallway, her eyes red-rimmed. "This is all your fault," she hissed. "You had to run to General Reed, didn't you? Couldn't accept that you weren't good enough?" I stared at her, suddenly seeing not an enemy but a young woman whose entire self-image was built on shaky ground. "I didn't contact General Reed, Brooke. I didn't even know who he was until graduation day. Liar!" But her accusation lacked conviction. "The truth is coming out, Brooke." "That's not my doing." She glanced back toward the conference room where Price sat alone, reviewing documents with growing desperation. "They're going to blame me," she whispered. "Price is going to say I falsified reports on his orders. He already suggested it. The admission didn't surprise me." What did you expect? That he'd protect you? He promised. She trailed off, the naivety of her trust in him finally apparent even to her. I should have felt satisfaction. Instead, I felt a strange compassion. It's not too late to tell the truth, Brooke. When we reconvened, something had changed. Brooke sat straighter, her expression resolved. And when the questioning turned to falsified peer evaluations, she cleared her throat. I need to make a statement, she said. Voice shaking but determined. For the next 20 minutes, Brooke Collins detailed how Commander Price had systematically targeted cadets who questioned traditional methods or came from backgrounds he deemed unsuitable for law enforcement, how he'd instructed favored cadets like her to report minor infractions, exaggerate incidents, undermine certain peers, how he'd promised special assignments and career advancement in exchange for loyalty. Price's face drained of color as his protege dismantled his career in real time. And Officer Taylor? General Reed asked when she finished. Why was she targeted? Brooke glanced at me briefly. Commander Price said her approach was dangerous. That she prioritized communication over control, that she'd get herself or others killed with her social worker mentality. She paused. But the truth is, she outperformed everyone, including me. And that threatened him. As the meeting concluded, I remained seated, processing what I'd heard. The scope of Price's manipulation was greater than I'd imagined. It wasn't personal, it was ideological. He genuinely believed officers like me weakened the profession. Commander Price was escorted from the building, suspended pending formal charges. Brooke would face consequences too, but her cooperation would be considered. The system was working as it should, holding people accountable for their actions. Yet as I watched them leave, I felt no triumph. Only certainty that the work ahead, reforming academies like Mesa Valley, was even more urgent than I'd realized. Officer Taylor. General Reed's voice pulled me from my thoughts. You conducted yourself with remarkable professionalism today. Thank you, sir. I know this couldn't have been easy. His expression softened slightly. But sometimes, facing our past is the only way to change the future. As I gathered my notes, I realized something important. I was no longer defined by what had happened to me at Mesa Valley. That chapter was closing. What mattered now was what I would do next. The following months passed in a whirlwind of activity. The task force operated at a relentless pace, developing new training modules, conducting field research, meeting with community organizations and police departments across the country. I traveled more in those 6 months than I had in my entire life prior, from Seattle to Miami, Boston to San Diego, gathering perspectives and testing our ideas in real-world settings. My role evolved quickly from observer to full participant. My recent academy experience proved invaluable as we redesigned training protocols, identifying outdated tactics and missed opportunities for improvement. I developed a specialty in community engagement simulations, creating scenarios that forced cadets to rely on communication rather than authority. The badge doesn't solve problems, I often told pilot groups. It just gives you the responsibility to help solve them. Today, we were presenting our complete curriculum to a roomful of academy directors from across the country. The culmination of 18 months of work, this was our moment to begin real change. I stood backstage at the conference center, reviewing my notes one last time. Nervous? Dr. Ramirez appeared beside me, her kind eyes crinkling at the corners. Terrified, I admitted. Some of these directors have been running academies for decades. Why should they listen to me? Because you represent what they're missing, she said simply. You've seen both sides, the outdated training methods and the better way forward. Your perspective is unique. I nodded, unconvinced but grateful for her confidence. Through the curtain, I could see the audience filing in. Serious men and women in uniform, some looking interested, others skeptical. My section of the presentation covered de-escalation training and community-centered policing, topics still controversial in many departments. General Reed opened the session with his characteristic directness. Law enforcement stands at a critical juncture, he told the assembled directors. We can continue as we have been, watching public trust erode while officer safety and morale decline. Or we can adapt, evolving our training to meet the complex demands of modern policing. He introduced the team one by one, saving me for last. And finally, Officer Jasmine Taylor, formerly of Mesa Valley Academy, now one of our most valuable curriculum developers. As I walked onto the stage, a murmur rippled through the audience. My story had made national news when Commander Price was formally charged with discrimination and evidence tampering. Some academy directors had publicly defended him, calling General Reed's intervention political correctness gone wild. Those same directors now watched me approach the podium, their expressions guarded or openly hostile. But I also saw younger faces, women and people of color who nodded encouragingly, waiting to hear what I had to say. 18 months ago, I was a cadet being told I wasn't fit to wear the uniform, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. Today, I'm here to talk about what makes someone truly fit for this profession and how we can better identify and develop those qualities. For the next 30 minutes, I outlined our new approach to training, emphasizing evidence-based techniques, psychological preparation, and community integration. I shared case studies where departments had implemented similar changes with positive results: reduced use of force incidents, improved officer retention, stronger community relations. This isn't about being soft, I emphasized, addressing the skepticism I could read on some faces. It's about being smart. It's about recognizing that our greatest asset isn't our tactical gear or our weapons. It's our ability to connect with the communities we serve. As I concluded, the room remained silent for a long moment. Then from the back, a hand raised. The director of one of the largest academies in Texas, known for his traditional approach. "Officer Taylor," he said, his drawl pronounced. "This all sounds nice in theory. But the real world isn't a classroom. When officers face armed suspects or volatile situations, all this talk about connection goes out the window." I'd anticipated this objection. "With respect, sir, that's precisely why we need to train differently. Under stress, officers fall back on their most ingrained responses. If all we've drilled into them is force application, that's what they'll use, even when other options would be more effective and safer for everyone involved." Another hand. A younger woman, director of a mid-sized academy in Michigan. "I've reviewed your curriculum and implemented some elements already," she said. "Our preliminary results support your findings. Cadets trained in de-escalation first, tactical response second, show better judgment in simulation exercises." The conversation opened up, questions and comments flowing from around the room. Not everyone was convinced, but they were engaged, debating, considering, challenging in ways that showed they were taking the ideas seriously. When the session ended, several directors approached me directly, requesting follow-up consultations or pilot programs for their academies. The Texas director wasn't among them, but I'd seen him taking notes during the discussion. Change would come slowly in some places, but it would come. As the conference center emptied, General Reed joined me at the podium. "Well done, Officer Taylor." "Thank you, sir." "Do you think we made an impact?" He surveyed the departing directors. On some immediately. On others, the seeds are planted. Changing institutional culture is a marathon, not a sprint. I gathered my materials, reflecting on how far we'd come. The curriculum we'd developed would soon be implemented in academies nationwide, reshaping how the next generation of officers approached their work. It wasn't a complete solution. Systemic problems rarely have those. But it was a meaningful step forward. That evening, our team gathered for dinner to celebrate. The restaurant overlooked the Potomac, the lights of Washington creating a glittering backdrop for our conversation. Champagne flowed as we toasted our achievement and the work still ahead. "A letter came for you today," Colonel Hayes said, sliding an envelope across the table to me. "From Arizona." The return address was Mesa Valley Training Facility. My stomach tightened as I opened it, uncertain what to expect. Inside was a formal invitation to speak at their upcoming graduation ceremony, the first class to complete a training program revised according to our new curriculum. The letter was signed by Acting Commander Maria Sanchez, Price's replacement. "They want me to deliver the keynote," I said. Disbelief evident in my voice. Full circle. General Reed nodded approvingly. "Will you accept?" I thought about standing on that stage again, not as a cadet fighting for recognition, but as a professional whose work was changing the institution itself. "Yes," I decided. "I think I will." Later that night, I called my mother to share the news. Her health had improved enough that she'd moved back to our apartment, with part-time care that my new salary easily covered. "They want me to speak at Mesa Valley's graduation," I told her. "The new commander is implementing our curriculum." "Oh, Jasmine." Her voice filled with emotion. "I'm so proud of you. Not just for succeeding, but for how you've succeeded. by lifting others up rather than tearing anyone down. Her words stayed with me as I stood at my apartment window, watching the capital city below. In 2 weeks, I would return to Phoenix, to the academy that had tried to erase me. Not seeking vindication, but offering transformation. The journey from that humiliating graduation day to this moment hadn't been easy. There had been difficult testimonies, resistance to our ideas, moments of doubt. But through it all, I'd maintained the conviction that had gotten me through the academy, that true strength comes from connection, not dominance. That empathy isn't weakness, but the hardest kind of power. And now, that conviction was becoming policy. The work was far from finished, but tonight, that was enough. The Arizona heat hit me like a wall as I stepped off the plane in Phoenix. After 18 months in Washington's milder climate, I'd forgotten how the desert sun could press against your skin, demanding recognition. I welcomed it, a sensory reminder that I was home, if only temporarily. Mom waited at arrivals, no longer in a wheelchair, but standing with the assistance of a cane, her face fuller and healthier than when I'd left. Beside her stood Mrs. Ramirez, beaming with pride. I rushed into their embrace, the familiar scent of Mom's perfume bringing a rush of emotion I hadn't anticipated. "Look at you," Mom said, holding me at arm's length. "Washington suits you." She was right. The nervous cadet who'd left Phoenix had been replaced by someone more confident, more assured of her place in the world. My suit was tailored now, my posture naturally straight rather than forced by academy discipline. Even my voice had changed, deeper, steadier, no longer seeking approval with every word. "I've missed you so much," I told her, linking arms as we walked to the car. "How are you feeling?" "Better every day," she said, and I could see it was true. The experimental treatment General Reed had helped secure access to was working. The doctors were cautiously optimistic about her prognosis. Strong enough to watch my daughter deliver the keynote at Mesa Valley, that's for sure. The drive from the airport to our old neighborhood was a journey through memories. We passed the diner where I'd worked double shifts to help with Mom's medical bills. The community center where I'd first met a police officer who'd taken time to talk to local kids. The park where I'd run countless miles, preparing for the academy's physical demands. "So much has changed," I murmured, watching familiar landmarks slide by. "And so much hasn't," Mrs. Ramirez said from the driver's seat. "Your old neighbors still ask about you. The community center has your picture up. Local success story." The thought warmed me. I'd been so focused on national policy that I'd sometimes forgotten the importance of local connections, the very thing I advocated for in our training programs. We spent the evening at home, catching up over Mom's chicken enchiladas, a welcome change from Washington takeout. She'd kept every newspaper article about our task force's work, created a scrapbook chronicling my journey from humiliated cadet to national policy advisor. The pride in her eyes made every difficult moment worthwhile. The next morning, I drove to Mesa Valley alone. I needed this moment to myself, to confront the place that had nearly broken me, now transformed by the very standards I'd helped develop. The facility looked the same from the outside. Sun-bleached buildings against the stark desert landscape, the American flag snapping in the dry breeze. But as I approached the main entrance, differences emerged. Community engagement principles displayed prominently on banners. A new motto carved above the door: "Protection through connection." Acting Commander Maria Sanchez met me in the lobby, a trim woman in her 40s with intelligent eyes and a firm handshake. "Officer Taylor, it's an honor to have you here," she said, with a warmth Commander Price had never shown. "Your curriculum has already changed our academy in profound ways." She gave me a tour of the facility, pointing out modifications made to implement our training approach. The old tactical obstacle course now included scenarios requiring verbal de-escalation. Classroom walls displayed conflict resolution frameworks alongside traditional use of force continuums. Community members regularly participated in training simulations, providing feedback to cadets. The changes weren't easy, Commander Sanchez admitted as we walked. Some instructors resisted, claimed we were softening the program. But the results speak for themselves. Our cadets perform better on all metrics: physical, tactical, and especially interpersonal. We paused at the training yard, watching cadets practice a containment exercise. Unlike my time at the academy, the scenario emphasized communication first, physical control second. "What happened to Brooke Collins?" I asked, the question emerging before I could reconsider. Commander Sanchez's expression turned thoughtful. She completed her probationary period with another department under close supervision. Last I heard, she's doing well. Apparently, she's become an advocate for ethical standards in her precinct. The news surprised me, but people could change. Brooke had been a product of the system as much as its enforcer. And Commander Price? Retired with a reprimand. He avoided criminal charges by cooperating with investigators. She shook her head. The damage he did to this institution will take years to repair, but we're committed to that work. As graduation time approached, I retreated to prepare my remarks. The auditorium filled with families, officials, and press, a much larger crowd than had attended my own graduation. My mother sat in the front row, no longer in a borrowed wheelchair but proudly upright, supporting herself with her cane. Commander Sanchez opened the ceremony with a brief history of Mesa Valley, acknowledging past failures and committing to a new direction. When she introduced me, the applause was genuine, not the forced politeness I'd once received, but recognition from an institution ready to evolve. I approached the podium, looking out at the faces of cadets who had received training I'd helped design. They appeared different from my class, more diverse, more engaged, their expressions reflecting not just pride in their accomplishment, but understanding of their responsibility. 2 years ago, I stood where you're sitting now, I began, uncertain if I belonged, despite everything I'd achieved. Today, I return not seeking vindication, but offering partnership in the critical work ahead. I spoke about the changing landscape of law enforcement, the challenges they would face, the importance of leading with empathy, without sacrificing safety. I shared stories from departments successfully implementing our new approaches, communities where trust was being rebuilt, officers who found greater fulfillment in their work. The badge you'll receive today is not a shield to separate you from the communities you serve, I told them. It's a connection point, a symbol that you stand with people not apart from them. Your greatest strength will never be your weapon or your authority, but your ability to see the humanity in every person you encounter. As I concluded, the cadets rose in a standing ovation that spread through the audience. Looking at their faces, determined, inspired, ready to serve differently, I felt a sense of completion. The circle that had begun with humiliation now closed with transformation, not just for me, but for the institution itself. After the ceremony, cadets approached me with questions, gratitude, and sometimes confessions of their own struggles. One young woman pulled me aside, her expression serious. I almost quit in the 3rd month, she said quietly. I didn't think I fit the mold. Then Commander Sanchez gave us your story as a case study. It changed everything for me. Her words stayed with me as I drove home that evening, the desert sunset painting the sky in impossible colors. My personal pain had become a teaching tool, helping others find their way. There was a poetry in that I couldn't have imagined on that devastating graduation day 2 years earlier. At home, Mom waited on the porch, her face peaceful in the fading light. "How does it feel?" she asked as I sat beside her. "To return as a keynote speaker to the place that tried to erase you?" I considered the question, watching darkness settle over the neighborhood where I'd grown up dreaming of making a difference. "Like the end of one chapter," I said finally, "and the beginning of something much larger." 3 years after my return to Mesa Valley, I stood in the Rose Garden of the White House, waiting for the president to sign the Law Enforcement Education and Development Act, legislation that would implement our training standards nationally. The journey from humiliated cadet to architect of reform had been neither straight nor easy, but it had led to this consequential moment. General Reed stood nearby, now sporting more gray in his hair but the same unwavering commitment to transformation. Our task force had expanded, gaining influence and credibility as pilot programs demonstrated reduced use of force incidents, improved community relations, and better officer retention. The evidence was becoming undeniable. Our approach worked, not just in theory but in practice. "Nervous?" General Reed asked, noticing my fidgeting with my sleeve. "A little," I admitted. "It's not every day you watch your work become national policy." He smiled slightly. "You've earned this moment, Jasmine. Own it." The ceremony proceeded with the formal choreography of Washington events. Speeches acknowledged the bipartisan effort that had brought the legislation forward. The president spoke about reimagining public safety for the 21st century. My name was mentioned among the architects of the new approach, bringing a surreal moment of recognition I could never have imagined when I'd stood outside Mesa Valley's gates, being told I wasn't on the graduation list. Mom watched from the audience, healthier than she'd been in years. The experimental treatment had worked better than anyone expected, giving her a new lease on life. She'd become an advocate for healthcare access, turning her own struggle into a platform for change. Perhaps that's where I'd learned to transform personal pain into public purpose. After the signing, during the reception, an unexpected figure approached me, the Texas Academy director who'd been so skeptical at our first presentation. "Officer Taylor," he said, extending his hand. Or should I say Deputy Director Taylor now? My recent promotion to Deputy Director of Training Standards still felt new, almost uncomfortable in its authority. "Either is fine, Director Hawkins. I owe you an apology," he said, surprising me. 3 years ago, I dismissed your ideas as impractical idealism. But we implemented your curriculum as a pilot program, and the results... He shook his head. "Well, they speak for themselves. Our officers are safer. Communities are more cooperative. Complaints are down 40%. His acknowledgement meant more than he could know, not for personal validation, but as evidence that change was possible even in the most traditional institutions. "I'm glad to hear it," I said sincerely. "That's exactly what this work is about, finding approaches that benefit everyone involved." As the reception wound down, General Reed gathered our core team for a private moment away from the crowds. Dr. Ramirez, Colonel Hayes, Michael Okonkwo, Layla Washington, the people who had welcomed me to Washington when I was still reeling from rejection, who had helped shape my raw experience into effective policy. "Today marks a beginning, not an end," General Reed reminded us. "Implementation will bring new challenges. Resistance will continue. But the foundation is laid," he raised his glass in a toast, "to changing not just policy, but culture." Later that evening, I found a quiet moment to call Commander Sanchez at Mesa Valley. Under her leadership, the Academy had become a model for our approach, hosting observers from departments nationwide. "Congratulations, Deputy Director," she said warmly. We watched the signing ceremony with our current class. "You should have heard the cheers when they mentioned your name." "How are things progressing there?" I asked. "Better than we could have hoped. Applications are up, especially from candidates with community service backgrounds. And remember that cadet who approached you after your keynote? Maria Delgado? She's now an instructor here specializing in community engagement." The news brought a deep satisfaction. This was how change perpetuated itself, not through my work alone, but through all those who carried it forward in their own ways. After the call, I stood at the window of my Washington apartment, watching the capital city shimmer below. My life had found a rhythm I enjoyed, developing policy during the week, teaching at the National Academy on weekends, traveling to departments implementing our standards. Mom had moved to a comfortable condo nearby, her health stable enough for independence. We had Sunday dinners together weekly, making up for the years when work and illness had kept us struggling just to get by. My phone chimed with a news alert. I opened it to find a national publication had released their annual list of most influential figures in public safety. My name appeared alongside veterans with decades more experience, described as the officer who transformed rejection into reformation. The characterization made me smile. It wasn't quite that simple, of course. My personal experience had been just one catalyst for change that many had worked toward for years. But there was truth in it, too. The pain of that day at Mesa Valley had fueled a determination I might never have discovered otherwise. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. I opened it to find a courier with a package requiring signature. Inside was a framed certificate and a letter on Mesa Valley stationery. The certificate was my original graduation diploma, the one that had been withheld, then hastily printed after General Reed's intervention. But this wasn't a copy. It was the actual document, now properly signed and sealed with an additional notation. With highest honors and recognition, of service to the advancement of law enforcement standards, Commander Sanchez's letter explained that they had located the original document during an archive reorganization. Rather than discard it, she thought I might want it as a reminder of how far we'd all come. I hung the diploma on my wall, not out of lingering need for validation, but as a tangible reminder that sometimes the path forward begins with a door closed in your face. The next morning, I prepared for a meeting with a congressional committee to discuss implementation funding. As I gathered my materials, I found myself thinking about Brooke Collins and Commander Price. I hadn't spoken to either since that investigation 3 years ago, but I'd heard updates through professional channels. Price had indeed retired. His reputation diminished, but his pension intact. Some would say justice remained incomplete in his case. But the true measure of accountability wasn't his personal fate. It was the transformation of the system he'd upheld and the prevention of similar harm to future cadets. Brooke had taken a different path. After her probationary period, she'd become involved in ethics training, eventually developing a program about recognizing and resisting institutional pressure to compromise standards. She'd even reached out through intermediaries, asking if I would consider speaking at one of her seminars someday. I hadn't responded yet, but was considering it. Perhaps that conversation was part of the continuing journey. As I walked into the Capitol building for my meeting, I reflected on my mother's words years ago. Empathy isn't weakness. It's the hardest kind of strength. Those words had become the foundation of everything we'd built, training that recognized the courage required to connect rather than control, to protect through understanding rather than force alone. The meeting room was packed with legislators, staffers, and fellow advocates. As discussions began about implementation timelines and budget allocations, the practical mechanics of turning vision into reality, I felt a profound gratitude for the path that had led me here, obstacles and all. What Commander Price had never understood was that his attempt to erase me had instead defined my purpose. What Brooke hadn't recognized was that her mockery had strengthened my resolve. The system designed to break certain people had instead created its own greatest challenger, but this wasn't a story of revenge or even vindication. It was about transformation, of institutions, of training, of culture, and most importantly, of myself. I had entered Mesa Valley Academy as a young woman desperate to prove herself worthy. I emerged eventually, understanding that worth comes not from external validation, but from unwavering commitment to one's principles. As I presented our implementation plan to the committee, I thought about the generations of officers who would train under these new standards. They would never know the full story of how this change began, with a cadet being turned away at graduation, a general's timely intervention, and the long work of reform that followed. They didn't need to know. They only needed to benefit from the lesson at its core, that true strength lies not in domination, but in connection, not in authority, but in service, and that sometimes the most important quality in creating change is the simple, stubborn refusal to be erased.